creepy encounters, 3 unforgettable stories. Story 1, The Night in the Hills. In a small Appalachian town during the 1970s, I found myself spending memorable moments with my uncles, Jeb and Carl. Despite being technically my uncles, they were closer in age to me, making our interactions feel more like hanging out with older brothers. Whenever we visited our grandparents, we would embark on adventures together. One autumn day, they suggested we try some beer they had stashed in the pickup truck. I was just 14 at the time, but the idea of sharing a drink with my uncles was too tempting to resist. The taste was strange to me at first, but I was determined to get a little tipsy and join in their fun. To avoid getting caught by the adults, we decided to drive out into the countryside. In those days, it was somewhat common for young guys to cruise around with beers in hand. Even though it wasn't the safest practice, we embraced the thrill of our secret excursion. As we drove through the winding, narrow gravel roads of the rural area, I couldn't help but appreciate the crisp fall air and the rustling leaves. The dark hillsides and the occasional tree branch brushing against us added to the adventure. One particular stop stands out in my memory. We found a quiet spot with a grassy area overlooking a scenic landscape. We parked, played music, drank, and talked, creating memories that would stay with me forever. However, that night took an unexpected turn. Robbie, a friend who had joined us, noticed strange lights in the woods. Initially, I brushed it off, thinking it was nothing more than hunters or some late-night activity, but Robbie persisted, and eventually, we all saw the moving lights. My uncles, Robbie, and I decided to investigate. While Robbie's younger brother and I stayed in the truck bed, they ventured into the woods. What they encountered was beyond our expectations. They returned in a state of panic, one of them injured and bleeding. They described 2 grotesque figures resembling something out of a horror movie. These sinister-looking individuals had approached them, initially appearing as hunters, but the situation escalated when one of them unexpectedly stabbed Robbie. At first, I thought it might be a prank, but the fear in my uncle's eyes convinced me otherwise. We hurriedly left the scene, and as we did, we saw the 2 eerie figures emerging from the woods, moving strangely. It was a terrifying sight. Once we arrived back at Robbie's house, we realized the gravity of the situation. Robbie's wound was treated, leaving an ugly scar, both physical and emotional. That night, we learned that even in the serene countryside, unimaginable horrors could lurk in the shadows. After the unsettling encounter with the 2 bizarre figures in the woods, life continued in our small Appalachian town, but the memory of that night haunted me. We never did find out who those individuals were or what their intentions had been. As the years passed, I grew older and wiser, reflecting on the dangers that could lurk even in the serene countryside. Robbie eventually healed from his injuries, but the emotional scars remained for all of us. We shared a bond forged in fear that night, a bond that made us more cautious and vigilant. My uncles, Jeb and Carl, continued to be a significant part of my life. We embarked on many more adventures, though we steered clear of the remote areas that had once seemed so inviting. The memory of those strange, menacing figures ensured we stayed closer to home. In time, we discovered the joys of safer, more typical pastimes like fishing, hiking, and camping. Those experiences allowed us to reconnect with nature without the lurking fear of the unknown. Although that fateful night in the 1970s was filled with terror and uncertainty, it also taught us the importance of family and the bonds that held us together. It was a story we shared and retold over the years, a reminder of the eerie mysteries that could unfold in the heart of the countryside, forever etching itself into our collective memory. Story 2, The Poolside Encounter with Giant Water Bugs. During my college days in Florida, I worked part-time at an upscale motel with a beautiful pool. One scorching summer day, after a series of heavy rainstorms, I was tasked with cleaning the pool. This wasn't part of my usual duties, but my manager offered to let me go early and pay me a full day's wage if I tackled the job. As I began cleaning the pool, a stunning young woman in a bikini approached me, asking when the pool would be ready to swim in. I explained that it would take some time since I had just started cleaning. She decided to relax by the pool and strike up a conversation with me. As we chatted, I worked diligently, gradually clearing the debris from the shallow end of the pool. At one point, she asked if she could dip her legs in the water. I agreed, and she placed her legs in the shallows. However, that's when I noticed something peculiar. Small, dark creatures were swimming towards her legs from one of the pool filters. Panicking, I yelled at her to get out of the pool, and she quickly complied. It turned out that those creatures were giant water bugs, often referred to as toe biters. While they aren't venomous, their painful bites are something you'd want to avoid. We both freaked out at the sight of these monstrous insects. I explained the situation to my boss, and he agreed to close the pool and call in a specialist to deal with the water bugs. Even though they weren't supernatural, those water bugs left a lasting impression on me, and I've never been so relieved to avoid a dip in the pool. Florida was a place of sunshine and warmth, but it also came with its share of bizarre encounters. Despite the rational explanation for the water bugs incident, I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling it left behind. The idea of giant, deceptive insects lurking in the pool was enough to make anyone uneasy. The motel was a hub of activity, with guests coming and going, and our team of housekeepers always had interesting stories to share. As the days passed, I went back to my usual housekeeping tasks, leaving the pool cleaning ordeal behind me. One day, as I was cleaning a guest's room, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation between two other housekeepers in the hallway. They were discussing a recent incident involving a different motel guest. Apparently, this guest had claimed to have seen something strange in the pool area late at night. According to the guest's account, they had been sitting by the pool, enjoying the warm Florida evening when they noticed something moving in the water. At first, they thought it might be a reflection or a trick of the light, but as they stared closer, they realized it was something else entirely. The guest described seeing a shimmering figure, almost translucent, moving gracefully through the water. It had a humanoid shape but seemed to be composed of water itself. They were mesmerized by the surreal sight, unable to look away. As the figure moved closer to the edge of the pool, the guests' fascination turned to fear. They claimed that the watery entity reached out a hand, almost beckoning them to come closer. Terrified, the guest had fled the pool area and reported the incident to the front desk. Listening to this tale, I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. While it was easy to dismiss such stories as overactive imaginations or tricks of the light, the water bug incident had made me more open to considering the unexplained. As days turned into weeks, I kept my ears open for more strange stories from guests and coworkers. While I never encountered anything as bizarre as the watery entity myself, I couldn't deny that Florida had its share of mysteries lurking beneath the surface, both in its pools and in its stories. Story 3: The Unexplained Footprints in Room 217. Back when I was saving up for college, one of my part-time jobs involved working as a housekeeper at a motel. This job exposed me to some bizarre and creepy experiences, some of which remain unexplained. While this particular incident likely had a rational explanation, it left me and my coworkers rattled. On a typical day, we were cleaning rooms, knocking on doors, and announcing our presence as housekeepers. I remember we were rotating between rooms, with each of us cleaning every third one. During this routine, I heard one of my coworkers let out a startled scream. My other coworkers and I rushed to see what had happened. When we entered the room, it appeared mostly clean, except for a broken window near the ceiling. The window was situated above chest height and extended all the way to the ceiling, allowing plenty of natural light into the room. However, the bizarre part was what we saw on the ceiling: dirty footprints that stretched along its entire length. We couldn't comprehend how those footprints had ended up on the ceiling, and it left us baffled. Our Honduran coworker, deeply superstitious, began suggesting it was the work of a demon or something malevolent that had traversed the ceiling before escaping through the broken window. A more rational explanation would be that two individuals, possibly under the influence of drugs, had been fighting in the room. In the midst of their struggle, they had somehow left footprints on the ceiling before breaking the window and fleeing. There were no signs of blood or injury, so it didn't appear to be a violent crime scene. The strange incident with the dirty footprints on the ceiling continued to be a topic of discussion among my coworkers and me for days after it happened. While most of us accepted the likely explanation of two people having a brawl in the room, our superstitious coworker remained convinced it was something otherworldly. Every time we passed that room, she would cross herself and mutter a prayer, refusing to set foot inside. Her fear was palpable, and it began to affect our morale as well. It seemed like an inexplicable and eerie occurrence that had embedded itself into our collective memory. Despite our coworkers' reluctance, the motel manager insisted that we clean the room as part of our duties. After much persuasion and reassurance that the room was perfectly safe, she reluctantly agreed to give it a try, with the cross still hanging from her neck. As she cautiously entered the room, she moved slowly and meticulously, double-checking every corner. The rest of us watched from outside, intrigued by her bravery, or perhaps just morbid curiosity. To our relief, nothing unusual occurred during her cleaning. No mysterious sounds, no eerie shadows, and certainly no malevolent presence. It was just another day of housekeeping, with no evidence of the supernatural. Over time, the strange incident gradually faded from our collective memory, replaced by the routine tasks and challenges of our jobs. Yet, we couldn't help but wonder about the source of those inexplicable footprints on the ceiling. As I moved on from that part-time job to pursue my college education, I carried the memory of that peculiar event with me. While I remained skeptical about the supernatural, I couldn't deny that some mysteries were better left unsolved, allowing them to continue as intriguing and eerie tales to be shared around a campfire or in the break room of a motel.